Welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading. This video is divided into two parts. I will be covering the first set of articles as mentioned on the screen provided before you. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. My colleague, Ms. Shubhangi Sharma, will cover the second set of articles appearing in today's Hindu newspaper listed on the screen. Let's start our today's discussion. This news appears on page number 10 in section 1 of the Hindu newspaper. It says Bhutan PM's party ousted in election. Now in this particular news, in a major verdict in first round of polls held in Bhutan, the incumbent Prime Minister Shering Togbe's People Democratic Party has been defeated. And after this defeat in the first round, they will not run for the second and final round. Now this developing story becomes important considering India's Bhutan's relationship. Now this topic forms a part of current events of international importance under your prelims examination, and for mains this topic forms a part of international relations under GS2, specifically under India and its neighborhood relations. So this significant political development in Bhutan becomes very important as India maintains very good relationship with Bhutan. Now this election is Bhutan's third National Assembly election, and as per the constitution of Bhutan, only two political parties can take part in the final round of general elections in Bhutan who has secured the maximum percentage of votes. And as per the Election Commission of Bhutan, the two parties are DNT which secured 32% and DPT which secured 31%. So both these political parties, that is DNT and DPT, will stand for the final rounds of elections in Bhutan. Since this is an ongoing story, let's wait and watch for the final result of the third general elections which is going on in Bhutan. With this, let's move on to the next news. The next news appears on page number 12 in the article section in section 1. The news reads, why does US want India to import more? Now this article has appeared in the context of imposition of higher import duties by US on Indian goods in order to reduce the trade deficit. Now here, trade deficit between USA and India refers to the difference between export and import. So from a USA perspective, it is exporting less to India as compared to its import from India. United States plans to impose higher import duties on goods imported from India as it will help in reducing their trade deficit. Now this topic becomes a part of current events of international importance in your prelims examination and under GS paper 3, specifically under issues relating to Indian economy, as relating questions have been asked previously by the UPSC examination. Now the question is, why has the United States decided to impose higher taxes? In this, it is important to know that President Donald Trump came to power on the promise of creating more jobs, and this could be done by ensuring domestic production of goods. So in order to sustain this domestic production, these goods also have to be sold in the domestic as well as international market. Now USA is targeting those economies that have trade surplus with United States. As mentioned above, trade surplus here refers to US exporting less and importing more from these countries. And in this, India is among those countries that also have a trade surplus with US. And hence, United States has pressurized India to import at least $10 billion a year, as it will help in reducing the trade surplus which India currently enjoys with United States. So as mentioned earlier that United States is exporting less to India and importing more. In other words, it also means that India is exporting more to the United States and vice versa, that is importing less from United States. Hence, for India, it's a trade surplus, whereas for US, it's a trade deficit. So in this aspect, let us go through India's trade surplus with USA. Between 2014 and 17, India's trade surplus with United States hovered around somewhere around $23 to $24 billion annually. Now according to the US Census Bureau, in the year 2017, India imported worth $25.7 billion, whereas India exported to the US worth $48.6 billion. Hence the gap between import and export. So in order to reduce this gap between import and export, the US latest demand is that it wants India to cut its trade deficit by close to half through increased in purchase of civilian aircrafts and natural gas. In this aspect, the United States is also targeting the imports from China and is imposing higher taxes on $50 billion worth of goods from China. China has reacted with similar duties on imports from the United States. So in this aspect, the United States is targeting every other country which has a trade surplus with United States. So the question is how the imposition of higher import duties by US will impact India. First of all, it would lead to increase in imports and reduction in exports from India. So effectively, India would have to import more and export less. This would have an adverse impact on the value of rupee, which is already under pressure. Further, spending an extra $10 billion a year on imports from the US would mean further pressure on the rupee. Pressure on rupee here refers to the exchange rate between Indian rupee and the United States dollars. Further, fall in value of rupee would make our imports costlier. For example, suppose if $1 was equal to 60 rupees and after depreciation $1 becomes 70 rupees, then for every import worth $1, India will have to spend 10 rupees more. Hence, the imports will become costlier. And the pressure on the rupee will also have a significant impact on the Indian economy, as rising prices could lead to decrease in consumer demand and hurt the GDP growth of the economy. So in this aspect, this article on higher import duties by USA on Indian goods becomes extremely important. Now let's go through two questions asked in the year 2016 prelims examination. The question was, there has been a persistent deficit budget year after year. Which action or actions of the following can be taken by the government to reduce the deficit? The options were reducing revenue expenditure. Yes. Second, introducing new welfare schemes. No, introducing welfare schemes will further add government budget. Third, rationalizing subsidies. Yes. Reducing import duty. No, import duty will not have any impact on deficit of budget. So the correct answer here is C, that is 1 and 3 only. Another question asked was, which of the following best describes the term import cover sometimes seen in the news? In this, D is our correct answer. That is, it is a number of months of imports that could be paid for by a country's international reserves. So this news on import cover becomes very important from our exam point of view. Hence, this article becomes extremely important to understand, and since this is a developing story, let's wait and watch how India responds to the higher imposition of import duties by United States. With this, let's move on to the next news. The next news appears on page number 10. The news reads, Prime Minister launches cleanliness campaign, says sanitation coverage in India has increased from 40% to over 90% in 4 years of Swachh Bharat mission. In your prelims examination, this topic forms a part of current events of national importance as well as social and sustainable development programs. And in your mains examination under GS paper 2, specifically under government policies and interventions for development in various sectors. So in this news, Swachhta Hi Seva 2018 is a Jan Andolan for Swachhta to be observed in the run-up to the 4th anniversary of Swachh Bharat mission from 15th September to 2nd October 2018, as 2nd October 2018 marks the birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Now this mission will culminate with the Mahatma Gandhi International Sanitation Convention from 29th September to 2nd October 2018, which also marks the start of 150th birth year celebration of Mahatma Gandhi. In this aspect, let us also look into the objectives of the campaign. One of the objectives of the campaign is to accelerate the momentum of Swachh Bharat in the run-up to its 4th anniversary. Further, to re-energize Swachh Bharat Jan Andolan and also lay down the foundation of sustainability. Next objective is to reinforce the concept of sanitation as everyone's business. And this the government aims to commence with Mahatma Gandhi's 150th birth year celebration with a nationwide campaign on Swachh Bharat mission. And in this aspect, it also talks about success of Swachh Bharat mission. It says that the sanitation coverage in India had increased from 40% to over 90% in the last 4 years. Further, 9 crore toilets have been built and 4.5 lakh villages have been declared free of open defecation in last 4 years. Further, another important success with respect to Swachh Bharat mission is that 20 states and union territories have also been declared as open defecation free. So these highlights marks important success with respect to Swachh Bharat Mission. Now Swachh Bharat Mission has two parts, that is Swachh Bharat Mission Gramin and Swachh Bharat Mission Urban. Under Swachh Bharat Gramin, in the rural India, it aims to improve level of cleanliness through solid and liquid waste management activities. Further, it also aims to make villages open defecation free, clean as well as sanitized. In this aspect, it's also important to know about key components of Swachh Bharat Mission Urban. The key components of Swachh Bharat Mission Urban are household toilets, community toilets, public toilets, solid waste management, information, education and communication, that is IEC, as well as public awareness, and capacity building and administrating and office expenses. In this aspect, the implementation strategy to be followed for Swachh Bharat Mission Urban is that of comprehensive sanitation planning comprising of city level sanitation plans, state sanitation concept and state sanitation strategy, behavioral change strategy, and information, education and communication. Further, enabling environment for private sector, capacity building, as well as special focus groups identified by the states. So in this aspect, Swachh Bharat Mission, both Gramin as well as urban, becomes extremely important to understand from a exam point of view, as questions can be asked in the mains examination as well to explain how Swachh Bharat Mission will effectively help in making India clean as well as open defecation free, and how implementation of Swachh Bharat Mission Urban will further help in improving the quality of life in cities. Thus, this news on Swachhata Hi Seva 2018 becomes extremely important from our exam perspective. With this, let's move on to the next news. The next news appears page number 9 in section 1. The news reads, Call for Policy, Action in Diabetes Prevention Management. Now this news talks about a global burden of disease study 2016, where the study says that diabetes will take heavy toll on India's healthcare system if left uncontrolled. Now this particular topic forms a part of GS paper 2 under your main section, specifically under issues relating to health and human resources. So in this particular news, Global Burden of Disease Study 2016 has shown that prevalence of diabetes has increased more rapidly in India, especially in the less developed states of India. The report highlights a need for policy and health system action. And this need for policy and health system action must be as per the disease burden of each state. Now this map talks about a change in diabetes prevalence in India between 1990 and 2016. So in this aspect, the news highlights that need for a policy and health system action must be as per the disease burden of each state, which can see in this particular map where disease burdens of different states has been shown in terms of change in diabetes prevalence from 1990 to 2016, as this process will ensure more effective management and prevention of diabetes. In this aspect, it's interesting to note that in the year 1995, there were 26 million diabetes patients in India, whereas in the year 2016, this 26 million has increased to 65 million. Now with respect to prevalence of diabetes in India, in 1990, 5.5% of the population were suffering from diabetes, whereas this has increased to 7.7% in 2016. Now you can use all these data if possible to highlight the condition of diabetes in India and also to have a comparative analysis from the early 90s to that of 2016, and why there is a need for policy and health system action as per the disease burden of each state, as it will ensure more effective management and prevention of diabetes in different states as per the disease burden. So in this aspect, the report calls for an effective policy implementation combined with proper allocation of human as well as financial resources. The report also calls for having a robust disease monitoring system which will help in prevention, treatment as well as reduction of death caused due to diabetes. In this aspect, it's important to note that diabetes has contributed to 3% of all deaths in India, and death rate due to diabetes has increased in 2016 as compared to the 1990s. Thus, this increasing cases of diabetes and deaths being caused because of diabetes has less likelihood of meeting targets of reducing deaths due to diabetes. Now, some of the risk factors associated with the diabetes as highlighted in the reports are high body mass index. As you can see, body mass index is calculated by weight in kg divided by height in meter square, and a BMI, that is body mass index, less than 18.5 is considered to be underweight, and BMI of 30 or more is considered to be obese. Another risk factors highlighted by the study are dietary risks. Further, it talks about obesity, including abdominal obesity in India. The next risk factor is tobacco use. Next, occupational exposure to second-hand smoke, alcohol usage, as well as low physical activity. So, in this aspect, the government of India has come with a national program for prevention and control of diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, as well as stroke. So, in this particular program, the government, apart from highlighting diabetes, highlights some other important aspect with respect to health. It talks about high blood pressure. It says that by 2020, there would be about 4.8 million deaths due to cardiovascular diseases in India. Further, by 2025, India will have the largest number of diabetics in the world. Further, it says tobacco kills 8 to 9 lakhs people each year in India. Another important aspect highlighted by this national program is 1/4 of adult population and 1/5 of school going children are overweight in India. Now, this is again a cause of concern. Further, overweight and obesity are emerging as a major public health problems. So, as we have already seen, that anyone having a body mass index of 30 or more can be considered as obese. So, in this aspect, the government has also highlighted that overweight and obesity are emerging as a major public health problems. So, in this aspect, the national program encourages the following strategies for prevention and control of diabetes. They are maintain normal body weight, follow a healthy nutritional practices, regular physical exercise such as brisk walking, jogging, etc., avoiding alcohol and smoking. Control of diabetes and its complication is possible by maintaining normal blood glucose levels, ideal body weight and blood pressure, and normal blood cholesterol and fats. Further, it says that all diabetic persons should regularly get their blood glucose estimation, kidney function test, eye checkup, as well as foot examination. So, this news on Global Burden of Disease Study 2016 becomes extremely important to understand from health perspective, as question may be asked on Global Burden of Disease Study 2016 as to how government intends to reduce cases of diabetes in India. With this, let's move on to the next news. The next news appears in page number 9 on section 1. The news reads, PSLV to launch 2 UK satellites tonight. ISRO's first fully commercial trip this year. This particular news forms a part of general science under prelims examination, and in the mains examination forms a part of GS paper 3, specifically under science and technology and indigenization of technology and developing new technology. In this news, the PSLV, that is Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, is scheduled to launch 2 Earth observation satellites of the United Kingdom, and the 2 UK satellites shall be launched from Satish Dhawan Space Center in Sriharikota. The 2 satellites of the United Kingdom are NOVASAR as well as S14, and these 2 satellites shall be launched in a sun synchronous orbit at 583 km from the Earth. In this aspect, it's important to note that these 2 satellites are owned by Surrey Satellite Technologies Limited, which has signed a commercial launch contract with Antrix Corporation. Now, in this aspect, let us learn about Sun Synchronous Orbit, Antrix Corporation, and also few aspects about PSLV, that is Polar Satellite Launch Vehicles. Now, the Sun Synchronous Orbit allows a satellite to pass over a section of the Earth at the same time of the day. The satellite shifts its orbit approx 1 degree per day. These sun synchronous orbits are used for satellites that need a constant amount of sunlight for observation. Further, the satellites that take pictures of the Earth work best with bright sunlight. As you can see in this particular picture, the blue line represents a sun synchronous near polar orbit, and the red line represents a geostationary orbit. A satellite in the geostationary orbit appears stationary when viewed from the Earth. In this aspect, let us learn few points about PSLV. Now, PSLV, that is Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, is an indigenously developed expendable launch system of ISRO, that is Indian Space Research Organization. It comes in the category of medium lift launchers with reach up to various orbits, including geosynchronous transfer orbit, lower Earth orbit, and polar sun synchronous orbit. All the operations of PSLV are controlled from Satish Dhawan Space Center in Sriharikota, which is on the eastern coast of India. Now, this becomes a very critical information from your prelims point of view. Further, it says that PSLV has a 4-stage system comprising a combination of solid and liquid fueled rocket stages. The first stage at the very bottom is solid fueled, having a 6 strap-on solid rocket boosters wrapped around it. So the first stage is a solid fueled stage. The second stage is a liquid fuel stage. The third stage has a solid fueled rocket motor, whereas the fourth stage, the launcher uses a liquid propellant to boost in the outer space. So all these stages becomes extremely important to understand and remember from a prelims point of view. So in this aspect, let us also learn about Antrix Corporation. Now this Antrix Corporation is the commercial arm of Indian Space Research Organization. As we remember that Surrey Satellite Technologies of UK has signed a commercial contract with Antrix Corporation. In this, Antrix promotes and commercially market the products of Indian space program, and the company also has a mini Ratna status. Some of the business activities of Antrix include provisioning of communication satellite transponders to various users, providing launch services for customer satellites, marketing of data from Indian and foreign remote sensing satellites, building and marketing of satellites as well as satellite subsystems, establishing ground infrastructure for space applications, and mission support services for satellites. So, all this information with respect to Sun synchronous orbit, PSLV, as well as Antrix, which is a commercial arm of ISRO, becomes extremely important from a exam point of view. Now in 2018, a question was asked on PSLV as well as GSLV. Let's go through the question. The question read, with reference to India's satellite launch vehicles, consider the following statements. First, PSLVs launch a satellite useful for Earth resources monitoring, whereas GSLVs are designed mainly to launch communication satellites. This statement is correct. Second, satellites launched by PSLV appear to remain permanently fixed in the same position in the sky as viewed from a particular location on the Earth. No, this statement is incorrect, as this is true for geosynchronous satellite. Further, GSLV Mark III is a 4-stage launch vehicle with the first and third stages using solid rocket motors and the second and fourth stages using liquid rocket engines. No, this statement is incorrect. GSLV Mark III is a 3-stage launch vehicle. So in this, A is a correct answer. So we see that this news on PSLV becomes extremely important to understand as questions have been asked by UPSC in the prelims examination. With this, let's move on to the next news. Now the next news appears on page number 15 in section 1. The news reads, blood test for fatal genetic disorder. In this news, it talks about Huntington's disease. So in this aspect, let's learn certain basic fact about this Huntington's disease. It says that this disease is an inherited disease that causes a progressive breakdown of nerve cells in the brain. So this disease is with respect to breakdown of nerve cells in the brain. It further says that this disease has a broad impact on a person's functional abilities and usually results in movement, thinking, and psychiatric disorders. In this aspect, the movement disorders associated with Huntington's disease can include both involuntary movement problems and impairments in voluntary movements, such as involuntary jerking or writhing movements, muscle problems such as rigidity or muscle contracture, slow or abnormal eye movements, impaired gait, posture, and balance, difficulty with the physical production of speech or swallowing. So these are some of the movement disorders. Now this talks about cognitive impairment with reference to Huntington disease, which includes difficulty organizing, prioritizing, or focusing on tasks, lack of flexibility or the tendency to get stuck on a thought, behavior, or action, lack of impulse control, which may result in outbursts and even acting without thinking. Further, lack of awareness of one's own behaviors and abilities, slowness in processing thought or finding words, and difficulty in learning new information. So these are some of the cognitive impairments with reference to Huntington's disease. In this aspect, the psychiatric disorders include, it says that the most common psychiatric disorder associated with Huntington's disease is depression. It says that depression appears to occur because of injury to brain and subsequent changes in brain function. Signs and symptoms of such disorders may include feelings of irritability, sadness or apathy, social withdrawal, insomnia, fatigue and loss of energy, and frequent thoughts of death, dying or suicide. As you can see in this particular picture, it mentions about the nerve cells. It says that Huntington disease affects the whole brain, but certain areas are more vulnerable than others. Pictured above are the basal ganglia, that is a group of nerve cells clusters called nuclei. These nuclei play a key role in movement and behavior control and are the parts of the brain most prominently affected in early Huntington's disease. So this Huntington's disease becomes extremely important for us to remember from an exam point of view, that it is a breakdown of nerve cells and it impacts physical movement, cognitive impairment, as well as psychiatric disorders. Now, the next two news appears on page number 14 in section 1. It talks about plastic problems and basically mentions about biophenols. So, let's learn certain basic facts about bisphenol. It says that bisphenol is an industrial chemical that has been used to make certain plastics and resins since the 60s, and bisphenols is found in polycarbonate plastics and epoxy resins. These polycarbonate plastics are often used in containers that store food and beverages such as water bottles. They may also be used in other consumer goods. Epoxy resins are used to coat the inside of metal products such as food cans, bottle tops, and water supply lines. So the question is, what are the concerns with respect to biophenols? Bisphenol can seep into food or beverages from containers that are made with BPA, that is bisphenol A. Exposure to BPA is a concern because of possible health effects of bisphenol A on the brain, behavior, and prostate gland of fetuses, infants, and children. So, bisphenol has certain possible health impacts specifically on the brain, behavior, and prostate gland of fetuses, infants, and children. It further says that additional research suggests a possible link between bisphenol A and increased blood pressure. So here in this news, certain basic facts about bisphenol becomes important from our exam perspective, as several questions on health are being asked by UPSC of late. So in this aspect, it becomes important to know the health impacts of bisphenol. Moving further, the next news appears on the same page on page number 14. It talks about signaling plants, where it mentions about glutamate receptors to release calcium ions. So let's learn about this glutamate in plants. It says when a plant is injured on one leaf by a nibbling insect, then that plant can alert its other leaves to begin anticipatory defense responses. This systematic signal begins with the release of glutamate. It says that this systematic signal begins with the release of glutamate, which is perceived by glutamate receptor like ion channels, where the ion channels then set off a cascade of changes in calcium ion concentration that propagate through the phloem vasculature and through intercellular channels called plasmodesmata. So all these words here becomes important, but the most significant is that parts of the plants can send defense responses with the release of glutamate, which is perceived by glutamate receptor like ion channels. Now about glutamate, it says that it is chemical that nerve cells use to send signals to other cells. It says it is the most abundant neurotransmitter in the vertebrate nervous system, accounting for over 90% of the synaptic connections in the human brain. So we see that glutamate is also present in the human brain. Further, it says that glutamate is a major constituent of a wide variety of proteins. Consequently, it is one of the most abundant amino acids in the human body. So glutamate is also present in the form of amino acids in the human body. So in this aspect, certain basic facts about glutamate becomes extremely important from an exam perspective.
Hello everyone, let's move on to the second part of this video in which I'll be analyzing the articles presented on the screen. These articles have appeared in the Hindu Delhi edition dated 16th September 2018. So let's begin. This news appears on page 15 of part 1 of the Hindu edition, and it reads that what is Buffalo Survey. Now, this will be covered under general science section in the context of preliminary examination, and it also forms a part under science and technology in GS paper 3 mains. Let us first try and understand why this Buffalo survey is in news. So this survey is a mission aimed at exploring the origins of the earliest galaxies. Therefore, it is in this context that we'll identify firstly the body coordinating the Buffalo survey, and secondly, a general overview of the domains covered under this survey. Now, before understanding this news, let us first try and create a rationale so as to why we have considered this news, that is Buffalo survey. Now, in the prelims 2018, a question appeared which said that the terms event horizon, singularity, string theory and standard model are sometimes seen in the news in the context of. So the answer for this was observation and understanding of the universe. And Buffalo survey too comes under a part of this. Therefore, this news is important from preliminary perspective. Now let's move on to the news. Now the first thing we must know is the full form of the Buffalo Survey. It stands for Beyond Ultra Deep Frontier Fields and Legacy Observations. And the second most important thing to remember in this news would be that this survey aims to observe 6 massive galaxy clusters and their surroundings, as this will help the astronomers to determine how rapidly the galaxies were formed in the first 800 million years after the Big Bang. Another important thing we need to remember is that this mission is coordinated by NASA. Therefore, we need to remember 3 important things about Buffalo. Number 1, its full form. Secondly, that it aims to observe 6 massive galaxy clusters, as this will allow astronomers to determine how rapidly galaxies were formed in the first 800 million years after the Big Bang. And lastly, this mission is coordinated by NASA. And this ends the description for this news. The next news appears on page 14 and it deals with restoring coral ecosystems. Now, this is covered under Environment and Ecology in the context of preliminary examination, and it is also covered under GS paper 3 under Environment in the context of mains. Now we know that coral ecosystems form an important part under the preliminary examination, as previously many questions has been asked from the same. For example, in 2018 prelims, a question concerning the area and the extent of coral reefs was asked. So we'll first understand our news and later answer this question. So this news suggests that from 2000 to 2005, the National Center for Coastal Research has been mapping corals in the Gulf of Kutch, Gulf of Mannar, Lakshadweep and Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Let us also locate these places on the map of India. So here near Gujarat lies the Gulf of Kutch. Then we have Lakshadweep Islands. Here we have Gulf of Mannar. And finally here we find the cluster of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So this mapping gave a shocking result, as it was found that the coral reefs in India that were still alive were found to be less than 40%. And it was due to this decline that from 2005 till present, the National Center for Coastal Research, along with the support from the Department of Science and Technology, has been surveying the area around Agatti and Kavaratti Islands in the Lakshadweep and has transplanted branching corals, massive corals and foliac corals as a part of restoration efforts. So it is in this context that we'll identify 3 things. Number 1, what do we understand by coral reefs? Secondly, we'll identify some of the restoration efforts. And thirdly, we'll talk about coral bleaching, which is the main reason the population has been declining. So let's move further. Now, what are coral reefs? They are colonies of tiny animals found in marine waters which contains nutrients. Apart from this, they are referred as the rainforests of the sea because they comprise as one of the most diverse ecosystems on Earth. And these diverse ecosystems are held together by calcium carbonate structures which are secreted by these corals. Apart from this, as we have already discussed, coral reefs in India are found near Gulf of Mannar, Gulf of Kutch, Lakshadweep Islands and Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Moving on to the restoration efforts, we have already discussed that the National Center for Coastal Research, along with the Department of Science and Technology, has been surveying around the Agatti and Kavaratti Islands in the Lakshadweep and have restored it by transplanting branching corals, massive corals and foliac corals. Moving on to the restoration efforts, we have already discussed that the National Center for Coastal Research, along with the Department of Science and Technology, has been surveying around the area of Agatti and Kavaratti Islands in the Lakshadweep and have transplanted branching corals, massive corals and foliac corals as a part of the restoration effort. Now, the important point to remember in this is that National Center for Coastal Research comes under the Ministry of Earth Sciences. Coming to the next point, the researchers have planned to replicate this same model in the Gulf of Mannar region, that is transplanting of corals. And in order to do that, they have set up a center of 25-acre piece of land near the Rameshwaram coast. So we must remember this. Apart from this, the team of National Center for Coastal Research is partnering with Gulf of Mannar Marine National Park Authority, and they will first monitor the 21 islands located in Gulf of Mannar, and then they will later identify the degraded areas. And once this is done, transplantation work of coral species will soon begin. Therefore, the important points to keep in mind is that NCCR comes under Ministry of Earth Sciences, and secondly, the restoration work being done in the Lakshadweep Island is now extended to the Gulf of Mannar region. And finally, how this restoration work is done? By transplanting branching coral species. Now we have been constantly talking about the declining coral ecosystem. Let us try and understand the reasons behind its degradation. Now the health of a coral can be identified from its color. For example, look at this image. The first coral is a healthy one as it is full of colors, and this bright color is a result of an algae which is living in the tissues of the corals. However, when the ocean water is warm or there is pollution, this algae tends to leave the coral, which in turn makes it completely white, and this process is known as coral bleaching. An example of the same is shown in the third picture, that is a bleached coral which is turned completely white. Now, it is not necessary that if a coral bleaches, it turns dead. It can survive a bleaching event, but they become more stressed and are subject to mortality. And an example of the same is the second picture. Now, the most important point to keep in mind is that it is not necessary that if warm water increases, then bleaching will occur. Sometimes bleaching also occurs when cold water temperature rises. And an example for the same is January 2010 Florida Keys, wherein coral bleaching event happened due to rise in cold water temperatures, and this resulted in some coral deaths. Now, in light of this information, let us go back to our previous year question and try to solve it. So in this question, the first statement says that most of the coral reefs are found in tropical waters. We have just understood that coral reefs are known as rainforests of the marine areas. Hence, this statement will be correct. The second statement says that more than 1/3 of the world's coral reefs are located in the territories of Australia, Indonesia and Philippines. So we know that the Great Barrier Reef lies in Australia, and Indonesia and Philippines too contain a substantial amount of coral reefs. Hence, this statement is also correct. Now, the third statement says that coral reefs host far more number of animal phyla than those hosted by the tropical rainforests. Now, this statement will also be correct as we know that corals are one of the most diverse ecosystems on this earth. Hence, our final answer would be option 3, that is, all three statements are correct. So with this, we complete the description of this news. The next news appears on page 12 of part 2 of the Hindu, and it is covered under general science section in the context of preliminary examination, and it is also covered under GS paper 3 in the context of mains. This news is pertaining to the epidemic caused by tuberculosis, which according to WHO is #1 killer among infectious diseases in the world. Now let us first understand the current context with respect to this news. The United Nations General Assembly has decided to hold a high-level meeting on 26 September 2018 to fight against tuberculosis, and the theme for this meeting will be United to End Tuberculosis, an urgent global response to a global epidemic. Also, this meeting will be held in New York. So it is in this context that we'll identify the aim and objectives of this talk, which is going to happen in late September. And secondly, we'll talk about a medicine named bedaquiline, which is very effective in TB and has been recently in news for many reasons. So let's move forward. Now we have just discussed that the members of the United States General Assembly have decided to set up a fight against TB, and in order for that, a summit will be held on 26th September in New York. Now the main aim of this summit will be that the world leaders will commit to end this epidemic of TB by 2030, and in order to do this, they will come up with 13 billion annually to achieve this goal. Apart from this, The second thing that we must know with respect to TB is the medicine bedaquiline, as this drug has recently been in news because World Health Organization has placed this drug under the priority list. Now the reason for putting bedaquiline under priority list was because it has dramatically transformed the treatment for patients having multi-drug resistant TB and is now considered a powerful alternative drug which is a part of fully oral regimen. So finally, in a quick recap, we need to know about the summit which is going to happen in late September and its goal to end this epidemic by 2030. Secondly, we also need to know something about bedaquiline, why it is placed in the priority list and who placed it in the priority list. If you want to learn more about the bedaquiline medicine, please refer to the DNS of 4th September wherein this topic has been covered in great details. The next news appears on page 12 of part 2 of the Hindu and it is dealing with the Ice, Cloud and Land Elevation Satellite 2 which is built by NASA. Now this news will be covered under general science in the context of preliminary examination and will also be covered under GS paper 3 in the context of mains. Now let us first understand the current development with respect to this news. Now NASA's most advanced space laser satellite, that is ICE satellite, took off on Saturday on a mission to track ice loss around the world and improve forecasts of sea level rise as the climate warms. Also, before the ICE satellite 2, there was the ICE satellite 1 which earlier revealed that sea ice was thinning and ice cover was disappearing from coastal areas in Greenland and Antarctica. So with respect to these developments, we'll identify 3 important things. Number 1, what is ICESat-2 and what is its purpose? Secondly, we'll discuss the working of ICESat-2 and thirdly, we'll discuss that why this mission is important. So let's move forward. Now let us first understand the purpose behind launching ICESat-2. So this Ice, Cloud and Land Elevation Satellite is the most advanced laser instrument which is developed by NASA. And the main aim for launching this satellite was to measure the changes in the heights of Earth's polar ice in unprecedented detail. Moreover, it will record the average annual elevation change of land ice covering in Greenland and Antarctica with great precision. So Greenland and Antarctica are very important in this context as this satellite is going to measure the elevation change in these 2 places. Now, we must also have a rough idea so as to how this ICESat is supposed to work. So the important thing to remember here is that a technique known as photon counting is used in the working of ICESat and ATLAS or Advanced Topographical Laser Altimeter System is used as a technology within ICESat-2. Apart from this, the satellite is capable of firing 10,000 pulses of light every second and this is helpful in equating the height of the reflecting surface. Also, the laser system incorporated in this satellite is making a measurement of every 70 centimeters of ice which moves forward. So finally, the most important facts we need to remember with respect to the ICESat's working is the ATLAS technology and the photon counting method. Finally, let us also understand so as to why this ICESat-2 mission is important. Now we have already discussed that the main aim of ICESat-2 was to calculate the annual elevation change of land ice which is covering Greenland and Antarctica, and it is done because Antarctica and Greenland lose billions of tons of ice every year. The reason being warm water from the ocean which is able to melt the land glaciers at the meeting point. And it is because of this that the sea levels are rising worldwide. This phenomena is also impacting the Arctic region because it has lost 2/3 of its sea ice since the 1980s. And although this has no direct impact on the heights of ocean, however, we can find a temperature rise in the regions. Thus, it is to counter these effects that ICESat is used to monitor the changing ice levels. So as a quick recap to this news, please remember the purpose of ICESat-2, that is to calculate the changing land ice level in Greenland and Antarctica. Please remember these two places. Apart from this, please also have a look at the atlas and the photon counting technology. And finally, do make some points so as to why this mission is important and what is the impact of melting glaciers on different regions in the world.
With this, we come to an end to discussion of today's newspaper. Let's move on to the question for the day.